Hey, we're glad to have with us today the Georgia Secretary of State and also candidate for governor, Brian Kemp. Secretary Kemp, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Great to be on with you.
I know you're on your tour buses outside. Is it 50 counties and?
Yeah, 50 counties in 10 days. So we're sticking and moving.
How many stops are you making a day?
Oh, probably right around 5. So we had a very busy day yesterday. We started our first one at 7:30 and we finished Morgan County big Republican Party President's Day dinner last night. That's probably 9 o'clock, maybe 8:30 when we got out of there, and then we had to drive back to Atlanta because we all met there this morning and drove up to Dahlonega. So we had to be in Dahlonega at 7:30. So I got in bed kind of late and left kind of early. But that's what you do on a bus tour.
That's campaigning, right?
Yeah.
The 50 states. The focus is rural Georgia in this trip. Is it not? Is it more?
No. Well, we're really hitting everything. We're trying to hit a wide variety, covering the whole state. Obviously, we can't get to 159 counties in 10 days, but we're going close to pretty much everything. So, we're going rural, we're going urban, we're going suburban. I mean, we're working the whole state. That's the plan.
Let's get right into your candidacy for governor. Several of your opponents, some of them are on the floor at the House, down under the Gold Dome, some are on the Senate side. I'm just going to ask you direct, what House bills or Senate bills do you feel are taking place on the floor right now while you and I are sitting in LJ, Georgia, that may be political posturing?
Well, I think certainly some of the elections, voting equipment debate on the Senate side has been posturing. The House side, we've actually been working with them for quite a while on, looking at replacing the state's uniform voting system. We actually have been leading the way on that. We did a pilot project way back in October and on the November election in the city of Conyers. It actually had a paper receipt with it, worked very well. We did exit polling for that. The public liked it. The elections officials that used it liked it. But there's a lot of good technology that we can use in the future. We just got to decide what we want to go through the process to do that. Nobody was alarmed when they got reelected in 14. Nobody was alarmed when they got reelected in 16 and Donald Trump won the presidency. And nobody was alarmed when Karen Handel got elected to Congress over John Ossoff, even though he spent $30 million to try to beat her. But the left, they try to raise doubt in our elections, and they're trying to confuse the public. But I'm completely confident with our voting system, and I think it's wrong for people to raise doubt in our system. I don't think there's any issues, asking questions about it or saying what should we go to next, and we stand ready and willing to work with them to do that. But it takes a change in the law to do that. That's not a decision that the Secretary of State has.
What is the ideal voting system for Georgia that you would go with if you could put in place? Because I think right now we're hearing some catchwords. We're hearing Russian interference in our elections, which they had to make a correction when they added Georgia. They did, and I want to say that publicly. They had to make a correction when they did add Georgia and say that it wasn't. But Russian interference into the election, those are catchphrases, and all of a sudden the paper ballot has become a catchphrase. But one of the things that I have heard the most is on the electronic voting machines that there's no true recount process. So for Governor Kemp, what would be the ideal voting system for the citizens of Georgia?
Well, I think moving forward, certainly I would be supportive of having a verifiable paper audit trail. Our current equipment, a lot of people don't realize it has a paper tape inside of it that punches every time you vote on it. So there's a way to tie the number of votes to how many people go through the precinct, and it actually spits out the election results. But that's all kept by the counties. It's hand delivered to our offices. So there's a lot of ways to audit and verify election results. Now, some people don't like that. They want to have a piece of paper that you can look at, and I certainly have no problem with that. And I think that's what we'll see in the future. It'll be some version that uses the speed of marking electronically, a paper ballot being rolled out of the machine that has your votes on it, where you can hold it and look at it, and then you go over and scan that. That's when the vote's actually counted. Saves the paper receipt, but then the tally's done electronically too. Because you always have to think about what happens if all the paper ballots disappear. You know, people that want to go back to strictly paper, you know, they never want to talk about, well, what happens if you have a bad election worker that goes in and steals a bunch of ballots, or you have somebody that counterfeits ballots and marks a bunch of them for one candidate and just throws them in the pile.
We've had situations where ballot boxes are missing and look, boxes of ballots are missing.
Ask Jimmy Carter about that. And even when that happens, you know, there's been more votes than people that went in the precinct, but the left is always going to say, we got to count every single vote. Got to count, no matter what it is, count every single vote, even if it's fraudulent. So I think there's a way to address all of that in the future, and we've been leading the way to do that. I would like to just speak to the NBC piece, and you know, that's really why Donald Trump has used the term fake news so much. I mean, they're talking about a story that is literally 18 months old, like it happened yesterday. Homeland Security has since come out and really gone after them on Twitter about the way they reported that story. They incorrectly reported Georgia being part of that. We have never been hacked. We were not hacked in the presidential election. Our voting system is not hooked to the internet. So if anybody were going to try to manipulate that system, they would literally have to break into a government building, then break into a separate office to even get to the equipment. And then it would take forever to try to manipulate the machines. And plus, we have many procedures that the elections officials go through to make sure that we're doing testing prior to that, to make sure that the machines are wiped clean and that everything's ready to go. That's done in a public process. And of course, the national media doesn't ever want to talk about that. They think somebody's just going to hack in through some network to our voting equipment. Well, it's not hooked to a network. Now, what we have to be vigilant about is our voter registration system, because it is web-based and it can be vulnerable, and it was in a couple of other states. But we had not been manipulated here because of the strong stance and the work that I've done as Secretary of State to protect our systems, privatizing our data center that makes it more secure. We have a private sector network security provider now that monitors 24/7. More intensely during the election period. So we've done a tremendous amount to protect against cybersecurity attacks.
Let's switch to HQ2, okay, Amazon. And let me set this up. Governor Deal, and we're not going backwards into his last two administrations, but we continue to hear Georgia's the #1 place in the United States to do business, #1 year after year after year. Some feel we've purchased those jobs that moved in when Mercedes came in and the tractor company from Illinois and Amazon came in with tax abatements, and we gave a lot away that small business doesn't get that opportunity or so forth. What's a Governor Kemp feel about negotiating with these massive corporations to come into Georgia to create jobs, but the tax abatement that goes with it?
Well, I would really point to two things. I mean, part of my, the first point of my conservative 4-point plan is to make Georgia #1 for small business. That's who I've been for over 30 years, including right now sitting in this chair. I own a construction company. We still have a lot of rental property. We lay rock every day. I own a timber farm. I'm involved in a couple other ag-related businesses. So I've been fighting the good fight out there, and they're all truly small businesses. That is what drives our economy. That will be my focus as governor, and it's what drives the local economy here. And that's what will be my focus, to make Georgia #1 for small business. Whether you work in one, own one, want to start one, or whether you want to grow the one that you got. I think we do that by doing regulatory reform is a big first step. In regards to the Amazon or any other economic development project, I will be the governor that's going to ask, how much is it going to cost? Who's going to pay for it? And are we getting a good return on investment? And, those are the questions that we need to ask. I think you've got to compete in that world, whether you like it or not, to be able to move the needle on some bigger projects. But you also have to be realistic that you don't want to give away more than you're going to get in return. And I've been supportive of the idea of bringing Amazon here, bringing HQ2 here, but I've also said many times it's not the end of the world if we don't get them. We don't need to give the farm away to get them. I think we'll have a competitive package. I certainly believe Governor Deal and our Department of Economic Development will do that, as well as others that are working on the project. But the governor's shown in the past that he's not going to go too far. I mean, we didn't on Volvo. We lost that to South Carolina because they basically gave away the farm. So, I'll certainly be a governor that's going to ask how much is it going to cost and who's going to pay for it. And also kind of ask the question of, look, where could we use those resources somewhere else where we may get a bigger bang for our buck instead of just trying to get, one company over here. If you think about spreading that money out across all of our state, doing projects by region that you could get, it really helps move the whole state forward, which is the third point of our conservative 4-point plan, and that's make sure all of our state is moving forward, specifically focusing on rural Georgia.
Obviously, you wouldn't want to say that obviously you're going to support economic development and growth within the state of Georgia, but what I'm getting at, would a Governor Kemp look at as strongly as the current governor at, my words, importing these major corporations at the tax breaks? Is that something that you feel Governor Kemp would be interested to go out and bringing those companies in?
I think you have to do that to compete in that part of the world. But you also got to pick what you want to do. Because let's just say, instead of talking about Amazon, let's say there's a big food processor in California that is getting overregulated and overtaxed, and they don't have enough water to do their production in that state, which is what's happening. States like California, Maryland, and others. I will be a Governor Kemp that will go to those manufacturers and say, come bring your plant to a part of our state where we need jobs, need investment, where we have agricultural products that you could vertically integrate that would create a tax base in those communities. We've got a great business environment. We're going to be lower taxed than where you currently are, and we got a better regulatory environment. Plus, we have the water that you need. Those are the kind of things I want to do as governor, and that's spelled out in our plan to strengthen rural Georgia that's on our website, that will create an economic development strike team that will focus on finding where the areas are in our state, what the assets are, and finding the right people at the local level that actually want to work on those projects along with state government to move the needle so everybody's got skin in the game and you can make some things happen. And I think that needs to be done by a targeted approach, and that's the one we'll have when I'm governor.
The infrastructure and transportation bill that are being looked at in Atlanta, there is we hear a lot of times two Georgias, okay? And you're in LJ, Georgia today with us, and we appreciate you stopping up here with us today. And you've been to Dahlonega, and you've been to Fannin County, you've been to several places. I think what sometimes we say in rural Georgia is, why do we have to pay for it? Would a Governor Kemp, what is your plan for infrastructure into the transportation in and around Metro Atlanta?
I'm glad you asked that, because again, it goes back to, I'm going to be the governor that's going to ask how much it's going to cost and who's going to pay for it. And I said early on in this campaign, I mean, look, I know the state's growing. I know we have congestion problems in Atlanta, and I believe there's common sense solutions to a lot of those. But I also understand that as somebody that's traveled to all 159 counties in our state and that has a better feel for, what's happening all across our state better than anybody else in the governor's race, and I'm not just saying that because it's a good campaign talking point. I believe it because I've been there. I've spent time in these communities. We're working with every elections office, so we're involved with the counties a lot. And I said early on, people outside of Atlanta do not want to pay for Atlanta's congestion relief. And we need to make sure we're getting a good return on investment on our transportation dollars, because you're never going to, outbridge and outpave congestion problems in Atlanta. It's just not going to happen. So we need to look at common sense solutions where we're getting the best bang for our buck, like a report that shows doing a 4-lane from Macon over to LaGrange, then 4-lane in Highway 27 or up toward Chattanooga. So you get all the truck traffic coming out of the port and up 75 south that doesn't need to go to Atlanta or the metro area, and have them bypassing Atlanta. I mean, that is a project that's on the books, that's got the best return on investment. We also need to continue to build out and provide the resources we need to our inland ports, so those north of Atlanta and south, so we can continue to move those containers in being hauled by tractor trailer and by truck, to put them on rail so they're not going through downtown Atlanta, which will free up space on our highways. But we've also, that being said, I'm also supportive of the regional efforts that's going on in Atlanta, for them to help themselves, for them to raise the tax dollars that they need to do some innovative things with transportation. And everybody's talking about heavy rail. I mean, look, heavy rail, it'd be great, but nobody's saying how much is it going to cost and who's going to pay for it and how long is it going to take to implement. Now, I've heard others talking about rapid bus transit, where you dedicate a lane that you could use buses today, but that lane tomorrow may be autonomous vehicles that are traveling 90 miles an hour bumper to bumper. I mean, you think about how much more asphalt you could use traveling at high speeds than you do now. There's plenty of bumper to bumper traffic in Atlanta, but it's moving at 5 miles an hour. Think about if it was moving at 90 when you have self-communicating cars, self-driving cars that are in their own dedicated lane, moving traffic through downtown. So we have to continue to think innovatively as well.
I know you're in a hurry. I have a couple more. This one might take a minute, and then I have a couple quick ones before we close. SB 366. SB 366 is to establish a review it's a compensation study. Okay.
Correct.
All right. Now, let me ask you my question here for law enforcement. I think in the last budget or budget before, 2 years ago maybe, the governor and the state passed, I'm going to call it a well-deserved increase for the Georgia State Patrol and some other state employees. And at that time, that immediately sparked the discussion with city and municipality law enforcement, their wages, sheriffs and their deputies and their wages. But what the governor did comes out of the state budget. What the discussion here is out of your county, your sheriff and deputies are paid out of your property tax. I mean, same thing with your law enforcement, your city. How do you feel about this study that they're looking to do, and then maybe mandating or putting together these compensation grant programs? I mean, isn't that kind of like the state mandating? Do you know where I'm going with that, sir?
Yeah, I know where you're going. Everybody's for local control until they're not.
Okay, all right. I want to say, we have a great sheriff in this county. We like him. Sheriff in the counties we like. And I'm not saying whether or not they deserve a raise or not. My concern is the budget or the pool of money that comes out and who's making the decision.
Well, let me just say this. I mean, I'm the only candidate in the governor's race that has a law enforcement under their purview. We have 20 post-certified investigators that do complex investigations dealing with securities fraud from a financial standpoint, financial investment type things, election law, certainly, voter fraud cases, things of that, and then professional licensing violations. So people that are doing unlicensed practice or people that are abusing the laws and rules we have to protect the public. So I understand law enforcement very well. I also used to chair the Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee when I was in the legislature. So I worked with the Sheriff's Association, I worked with the GBI, the crime labs, the State Patrol, the Department of Public Safety, and all of them, for all kind of first responders. And I support, pay raises in law enforcement. I know they need them. But I do not support having a minimum wage that's dictated by the state government down to the county level. I mean, that is taking away local control. And if you're going to have that, then you're going to have state control. And I don't know of any sheriffs out there that want more state involvement. If anything, they want less. So that's why you elect your county commissioners. And that's who decides how much county employees get paid. And quite honestly, there's many communities across our state that have been tackling the issue with law enforcement pays. I know last week Gwinnett County's talking about it, or I think Gwinnett County's already done it, or they're proposing it in this year's budget. They're talking about it up in Cobb. They've already done it, you know, over near me in Oconee County and many other communities around the state. And that, quite honestly, is where it needs to be tackled. But I'm also sympathetic to our rural counties that may not have the tax base to do that. So, I mean, I'm certainly not saying I won't work with people to do that. But I have a lot of sympathy for local control in the county commission being able to decide, you know, how much a deputy up in this part of the world may make versus one in rural South Georgia, because the pay scales are different. I think we get in a slippery slope if the state's trying to mandate that to the local governments.
Let me tell you what my concern is on that. When I read law enforcement compensation grants for poor counties, okay, I parallel that to, there's a lot of counties well-deserving, the children in South Georgia well-deserving of an education, and other counties, the kids are deserving of an education. But in our education system, we have what's called donor counties. I call it donor counties.
That's right.
You understand what I'm saying, yes, sir? So if something like this, I just get that feeling like, you know, if you're going to put, where do these grants come from? Where do the funds come from? Are we going to end up in a school system type situation where some counties are donor counties? Do you understand what I mean? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I completely get it, and that's
my concern.
Well, and that's a reason that if you're for true local control, you have to be for local control. You can't have it. You know, I'm for local control, except when it comes to law enforcement pay. And I understand the law enforcement. You know, there's many people out there that need pay raises, but the scale's not the same everywhere, and that's a local decision. It doesn't mean that the state cannot continue to work on problems that we have in law enforcement, like giving them more and more mandates and having them do more work, but then the state keep the fees. You know, those are some of the things that I think we can work with law.
The only thing, sir, Mr. Secretary, is I want to say we support law enforcement.
Absolutely.
We thank our law enforcement on a daily basis for providing the safety that we have, and we respect them. Okay, but I've yet to see the state help in any way that they didn't send the book of regulations that went with it.
I'm
a nervous wreck about if the state says they would like to help. Is the next thing in the mailbox is the book of regulations.
Well, there's a good example at the federal level right now dealing with elections. You know, there's a bill up there that's trying to allow for federal intervention, and they're basically playing it in elections, and they're playing it because we want to give the states help to deal with cybersecurity. But the devil's in the details. You know, you start reading that legislation, and it has all these mandates that you have on you, so there's all these strings attached. And then if you ever have something happen, it opens your front door up to the feds to come in. And I just don't think that's a good idea. It's not a good idea for the feds to be doing that to the states. That's a duty that we have and that we should take care of. And we're doing that here in Georgia, and we're very vigilant and work hard on that every day. But there's also issues that the county needs to be dealing with, and not the state. And they're tough issues. And it's not saying that I won't work with law enforcement on pay issues, but you know, that's an issue that's best solved, I believe, at the local community.
2015 budget, the Georgia State operating budget, $20.8 billion. 2019, the proposed $26 billion. 5 years, $5.2 billion in 5 years in increased spending, because they spend it. Would Governor Kemp look at reducing the rate of spending if it's coming in? Is it time that maybe we can reduce the rate of spending and give some back to the citizens and some tax cuts?
Absolutely.
Look at capping some things or even cutting some things. I mean, I'm not trying to take our interview negative with the current administration, but $5.2 billion in spending, and what say you?
Well, I say you're exactly right. Part of the second point of our plan is to fundamentally reform state government, the way it spends taxes and operates. A big part of that is implementing a spending cap that ties our state budget spending to population and inflation. That will keep us in check, especially in good times like we're in now, and it will allow us to have real tax reform when I'm governor. there's been growth in the budget, and there needed to be some because of the austerity cuts that we had during the recession. I mean, it was cutting to the bone. So we needed to fund money back, I believe, to education. We needed, we've done the Transportation Infrastructure Act, so there's been an increase in spending there, which people supported that, or at least their representatives did. The governor this year put $361 million in the budget to shore up the teachers' retirement fund. Plus, we put I think over $2.5 billion now into our reserve fund when we didn't have one really when Governor Deal got in office. So I give him a lot of credit for that. But now that we're at this point, it's now time, while things are good, to implement the spending cap. So it forces us to budget conservatively in good times, where we fund the things we need to, like public safety, like healthcare, like transportation, and like education. And then we cut out a lot of the frou-frou that we have in government and really hold the line on spending. We're gaining every year on good reserves. You have a low revenue estimate, you got money left over, and then you have real tax reform. But I want to be the governor that does a spending cap and then has tax reform for everybody. Because everybody in the race has been talking about tax reform. They're all talking about what they're going to do. Well, they've all been serving in the legislature. We haven't done anything yet except for helping the special interest. So I will be the governor that will implement the spending cap on day one, and then we'll also have tax reform that helps all Georgians. Okay, I'm being told our time is out, so rapid fire. I don't want to slow you down or stop you from answering these. I know you have a busy day. I do want to get a comment on Senate Bill 375, the Keep Faith in Adoption and Foster Care Act. I understand today the Senate Judiciary Committee cleared it 5-3, so it's passed the judiciary hurdles. What say you? Well, I support religious freedom. I've signed the pledge to sign a bill that references the federal statute, which is, to me, is the right thing to do. It's what this country was founded on. If we pass that, Senate Bill 375, it doesn't even matter what it does. But regardless of that, as governor, I will not support forcing religious institutions to do gay adoptions, and that's really what I think that bill is about. I believe those protections are in the law now, and as governor, I'll protect those for folks that want to undo that. Driver's license test, English only? Well, I think on the English only thing, it depends on what the form is. I mean, I'm certainly a believer that English is the official language of this country and this state. We're dealing with issues that counties are getting sued now, or the threat of lawsuits for providing, foreign language, voting information. That's really a sad thing to me. I don't agree with it, but I understand why they're being forced to deal with that with federal law. I do think there are certain places where we need foreign language forms for those that are here legally doing business in our country to be able to deal with our system. But if people are going to be driving here and be citizens, they need to learn English. And if they're voting, they need to do the same thing. And that's what I've pushed as Secretary of State. We need actually an immigrant work program for South Georgia throughout the years. What does that look like for Governor Kemp? What would you propose to make sure our farmers in South Georgia were able to get the help they needed during the times that they needed? Well, I will be a governor that will be strong on illegal immigration, going after criminal illegals that are in our state to deport them and send them home. Our taxpayers should not be worried about them breaking into their house, kicking their front door in, shooting their children up, or be paying for them to sit in our jails. I will also make sure that we enforce the ban on sanctuary cities. It's time to put Georgians first. That's the fourth point of our conservative 4-point plan, is putting Georgians first ahead of those that are here illegally, the special interest, and the politically correct. And I've got a record of fighting for that as Secretary of State. I was the first candidate in the governor's race to come out and support Senator Perdue and Tom Cotton on their immigration legislation. The RAISE Act, which ends chain migration, cuts the number of I think by more than 50% of the immigration numbers that are coming in. I certainly support the president on building the wall, and I'll take it even further than the physical wall. I'm for a virtual wall, a human wall, whatever wall it is, to keep we've got to have some order at our border and secure our border, and that helps with, the drug element that's coming into our state that's killing our children, the opioid epidemic, and other things. So I'll be a governor that will focus hard on that, but also understand that we have farmers that need help getting their crops out of the field. So I'm certainly supportive of streamlining programs like the H-2A visa program, where they're not as costly, that you cut out the government red tape. To me, that's a natural fit as part of this whole reform package.
Rural hospitals are struggling. Lumpkin, I think it's Chesapeake Regional, is struggling. You're sitting in a county where we do not have a hospital. We have what's called a micro hospital. Right. Indigent care in the state of Georgia. These rural hospitals just can't continue to pay those bills. Medicaid expansion. How do you handle health care in Georgia?
Well, the Democrats' idea of throwing more money at Medicaid, a program that's failing and not working now and not providing enough to the providers, so they're not even doing it anymore, does not work. That is why we cannot continue to provide indigent care to those people that are here illegally and give them government benefits. So I will be working to deal with that issue. I talked to a guy at a hospital the other day that they had paid, I can't remember if it was $6 or $12 million in indigent care to illegals, is what he told me. So I think that's part of it. But also part of our plan to strengthen rural Georgia is to work on investment in these communities where you have projects of significance, where you start growing the population back. No formula for rural health care is going to work if you continue to have shrinking populations. So we need a governor that's going to focus on those areas, focus on better opportunities in those areas, like our plan for strengthening rural Georgia has in them, to move the needle and change the tide of shrinking populations in rural Georgia. And as many problems as we have there, I see great opportunity, because we have, as we talked earlier, we have great assets with our land, our water, hardworking people for the most part. But I'm also a believer that we cannot continue, the government cannot, and this is at the federal level mostly, we cannot continue to pay people to sit home and not work when they're able to do that.
Our time is up, and I know they're letting me know over in the control room that the time is up, and you've got to move on. You got several more stops. Tell us why the voters of Georgia should choose Brian Kemp for their next governor. Why should they vote for you?
Well, I think people should vote for me for governor because, number one, I have a record of doing what I say when I'm campaigning and actually doing that in office, like we've done in the Secretary of State's office, suing the Obama Justice Department twice to protect our citizenship check and our common sense photo ID laws, streamlining government, cutting our budget 25%, losing almost 35% of our people, but finding out a way to do more with less. That's exactly what I will do as your governor. I've got a record of doing that. And to the voters, I would tell them, the question for them is, who do you trust? Who do you trust to actually implement what they say? And I have a record of doing that. You can see that record in our plans on our website, which is kempforgovernor.com.
Well, Secretary, thank you very much. We'll tell you, we tell all candidates this. We wish you well in your campaign, and we thank you for your willingness to serve the citizens of Georgia. We appreciate you stopping by. I'm your host, BKP, and this is Secretary of State Brian Kemp, also candidate for governor of the state of Georgia.